My name is Claire Thompson. I'm 34 years old, and I thought that night was going to be one of the happiest of my life. I was 6 months pregnant, standing in the middle of our brand new home, surrounded by laughter, music, and the warm chatter of family and friends. It was supposed to be a celebration, a housewarming that marked a new beginning, not just for me and my husband Mark, but for the little girl growing inside me. I remember walking through the living room, a tray of glasses in my hands, smiling as cousins admired the high windows and neighbors complimented the cozy balcony. For a moment, I felt proud. This was mine. After years of saving, working late nights, and sacrificing vacations, but joy has a cruel way of being cut short. Just as I was about to raise a toast, my parents stood up. Their voices silenced the room. My father cleared his throat, his eyes cold. My mother held Emily's hand, my older sister, their pride and joy. And then came the words that split my life in two. Claire, this house isn't really yours. We've decided it belongs to Emily. From now on, you're only staying here as her guest. The sound of those words was like glass shattering on the floor. A murmur rippled through the guests. Some turned away, embarrassed. Others leaned in, waiting for my response. My chest tightened. I looked at Emily, who wore a triumphant smile, as if she had been waiting for this very moment. And before I go further, I want to pause here. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever worked hard for something only to have it stripped away, please like this video and subscribe. These family stories are painful, but sharing them means none of us have to carry that silence alone. Then my eyes darted to Mark, my husband, the man who had promised to protect me. But he didn't speak. He didn't even look at me. He simply swirled the wine in his glass, his gaze fixed on the floor. That silence was the second betrayal, more piercing than my parents' announcement. The night after the party, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My parents' words echoed over and over in my mind, each syllable carving deeper into me. This house belongs to Emily. They didn't care about the papers, the payments, or the sacrifices I had made. They had decided, as they always did, that Emily was the chosen one. And as I stared into the dark, I realized something painful. I should have seen it coming. The signs had been there all along. Growing up, Emily was always the golden child. 2 years older, she got the piano lessons, the new dresses, the expensive school trips. At Christmas, I unwrapped wool socks while Emily opened a necklace she had always wanted. When I brought home good grades or earned a promotion at work, the moment passed quickly, only to make room for Emily's latest achievement. Back then, I told myself it didn't matter. I tried to believe that love just looked different for each of us. I convinced myself I was strong enough to live without constant approval. But lying in the quiet of my home that night, pregnant and betrayed, I finally admitted the truth. It wasn't love shown differently. It was favoritism, pure and sharp, and I had been living in its shadow all my life. 6 months earlier, when Mark and I signed the mortgage papers, I thought things would finally change. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office, pride swelling in my chest as my name was written clearly on every page. It wasn't a gift. It was my savings, scraped together from years of late nights in marketing. That apartment was proof that my effort mattered. But even then, my parents cast doubt. My mother would call and say, "Claire, are you sure you can handle the payments? Maybe Emily should look over the paperwork for you." My father once muttered, "Emily has always been better with finances. You might get in over your head." At the time, I brushed it off as worry. I told myself they were just being protective. But deep down, it stung. Why couldn't they trust me to manage my own life? I was a grown woman, a wife, and soon to be a mother. Wasn't that enough to prove I was capable? And then there was Emily herself. She had a way of slipping into my home as if it were hers all along. I would come back from the grocery store, arms full of bags, only to find her sitting in the living room flipping through my mail. "Just making sure everything's in order," she'd say with a smile that never touched her eyes. One Saturday afternoon, I caught her measuring the curtains. "These won't do," she muttered. For a house like this, you need something more sophisticated. I remember asking her how she got in, and she shrugged casually. Mark gave me a key. He said you wouldn't mind. I did mind. I minded more than I could put into words, but my body ached from pregnancy, and my emotions were stretched so thin I felt I might snap. I bit my tongue. I told myself it wasn't worth another fight. Not with my sister, not with my husband. That night, I confronted Mark anyway. I asked him why he had given Emily a key without asking me. He didn't meet my eyes. She's just trying to help. You're overreacting. Then, as if on cue, his phone buzzed. He flipped it face down on the table, avoiding my gaze. The knot in my chest tightened. Day by day, it became clearer. I was being edged out of my own home. Emily's voice echoed in the hallways as if she already owned them. My parents stopped by with that same look of judgment in their eyes, and Mark's silence grew heavier with every passing week. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Pregnancy makes women emotional, doesn't it? Maybe I was too sensitive. But late at night, lying in bed with my hand resting on my belly, I couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was unfolding, that this wasn't just about favoritism anymore. It was a storm gathering slowly, quietly, and I was standing right in the center of it. And in my heart, I knew. The housewarming party was not the end. It was only the beginning of something much darker. The week after the party, the house no longer felt like mine. Every step I took through the hallways echoed with emptiness, as if I were already a stranger within my own walls. Emily came and went as she pleased, leaving behind her perfume and her opinions. My parents visited often, their eyes filled with judgment rather than love, and Mark, my husband, seemed more distant with every passing day. She handed me a printed email. My hands shook as I read, Emily had contacted a local real estate agency, claiming she was co-owner of my apartment. Attached was a forged document, my signature clumsily copied, payment histories fabricated to make it look like she had contributed. I stared at the page until the letters blurred. My stomach twisted. They weren't just trying to push me out emotionally. They were trying to erase me legally. I sent the email immediately to Laura Martinez, a lawyer Monica had recommended. In her modest downtown office, I spread everything out. The mortgage contract in my name, screenshots of Emily's texts about repainting her future home, copies of Mark's emails with my parents, and now this forged document. Laura scanned each piece quietly, her pen tapping against the desk. Then she looked up, her eyes sharp. Claire, this isn't just unfair favoritism. This is fraud, and you have more than enough to fight it. Her confidence gave me a strength I hadn't felt in months. That evening, I asked Mark to meet me in the park near Monica's apartment. The autumn wind carried a chill, but it was nothing compared to the ice between us. My phone recorded quietly in my pocket. He arrived looking worn but not remorseful. His hands shoved deep into his jacket, his eyes tired. Why, Mark? My voice trembled. Why side with them? Why take my home? He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Your parents, they promised to help us financially if I cooperated. Emily thought we could sell the apartment, split the money. I didn't know how to tell you. My throat burned. Didn't know how to tell me? You were plotting to steal the roof over your own child's head. He looked away, silent. His silence told me everything I needed to know. I stopped the recording and walked away, my legs trembling, my heart breaking. But inside, a new resolve began to form. Back at Monica's, I spread everything across her kitchen table. The mortgage contract, the forged email Paula had uncovered, screenshots of Emily's texts, Mark's correspondence, and now his recorded confession. Monica began sorting them into folders, her voice steady. This is airtight, Claire. Laura is going to tear them apart in court. I sat there, staring at the pile of papers that represented months of lies, years of favoritism, and a lifetime of being treated as less than enough. My hands shook. Not from weakness, but from the storm of emotions inside me, pain, anger, and something new, Resolve, I placed my palm on my belly, feeling my baby stir. And I whispered, more to her than to myself. They thought they could silence me. They thought they could erase me. But they don't know the strength of a mother. We will not be erased. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel broken. I felt ready. The morning of the trial, Albuquerque's sun poured through the courthouse windows, bright and unyielding, as if it wanted to expose every shadow of truth. I sat on a wooden bench, my hands clasped tightly over my growing belly. My wedding ring was long gone, my body heavier, but my spirit sharper than ever. Laura leaned close, her voice calm but steady. Remember, Claire, you don't have to carry this alone. Let the evidence speak for you. One afternoon at work, my colleague Paula pulled me aside. She lowered her voice, her eyes darting around the office before she slid her phone toward me. Claire, you need to see this. On the screen was a photo she had taken downtown. My parents and Emily sat across from a lawyer, folders spread wide on the table. My stomach sank. What is this? I whispered. They're trying to transfer the title, Claire. And from the way they were talking, they're not planning to tell you. The room spun around me. My pulse thundered in my ears. I forced a shaky smile for Paula's sake, but inside my world was collapsing. That night, long after Mark had fallen asleep, I sat in the dim glow of our bedroom lamp. My hands trembled as I opened his laptop. For weeks, his secrecy had gnawed at me, the constant texts he hid, the phone he kept face down on the table. I needed answers, even if they broke me. I typed in the password I had guessed months earlier. To my horror, the screen unlocked, and there they were, a chain of emails between Mark, my parents, and Emily. My breath caught as I scrolled. She doesn't need to know. Once it's in Emily's name, everything will be settled. Another reply. Claire will resist, but Mark, you need to keep her calm. Tell her she's overreacting, and then the line that shattered me. After this, we'll sell the house and divide the money. You'll be taken care of, Mark. I slammed the laptop shut, pressing my hand over my mouth to stifle the sob clawing its way out. The man I trusted, the man I had chosen to build a life with, had not been silent out of fear. He had been silent because he was guilty. I lay awake until morning, my baby kicking softly inside me, as though reminding me to stay strong. The next day I confronted my parents. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. Why? Why would you take away the one thing I worked for? My mother met my gaze, her expression cold. Because Emily deserves it more. She's the one who saved us years ago when we couldn't pay the debt. Without her, we would have lost everything. You were too young then. You wouldn't understand. It felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under me. So that was it. Their endless favoritism, their constant dismissals. It all boiled down to a debt from the past. My life, my dignity, my child's future, all weighed and measured against an old ledger that they had decided to balance in Emily's favor. I walked out of their house with tears blurring my vision. The betrayal of my parents cut deep, but Mark's deception was unbearable. That evening, I sat in the nursery, staring at the half-painted walls. The soft yellow paint we had chosen now looked pale and sickly, a reminder of dreams crumbling around me. I placed my hand on my belly and whispered, I won't let them erase us. Not this time. I knew I needed proof. If they could lie so easily, I would gather the truth piece by piece. Every text Emily had sent about repainting the walls when the house was hers. Every email Mark had forwarded to my parents. Every offhand remark my mother had made about Emily's future home. I wrote it all down in a notebook, each entry another piece of armor. Still, the pain grew sharper each day. Mark's phone buzzed constantly, and I noticed how his face softened whenever Emily's name appeared on the screen. One night, I picked it up while he was in the shower. My hands shook as I opened a message. Keep her calm, Mark. She doesn't need to know how close we are. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. It wasn't just about the house. The words hinted at something deeper, something I hadn't wanted to see. My chest tightened, my breath shallow. Betrayal was no longer a shadow. It was a flame, devouring everything I thought I knew. In desperation, I called Monica, my best friend since college. When she answered, my voice cracked. I poured everything out. The favoritism, the emails, the silence, the message. She listened without interrupting, her steady breathing the only thing keeping me from falling apart. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was calm, but fierce. "Claire, this isn't just about property. They're trying to take your life apart piece by piece, but you have something they don't. The truth. Gather it. Hold it close. Truth is your weapon." Her words lit a small flame inside me. Fragile, but real. That night, as I lay in bed, I pressed my palm against my stomach and whispered a promise to my baby. "They may take everything else, but they will not take this from us. I will fight. For you. For me. For the life they tried to steal." And in that quiet, with betrayal pressing in on all sides, resolve began to grow stronger than fear. The night I packed my suitcase, it felt as though I were closing the door on the life I had once believed in. Every corner of that apartment held memories I thought would last. The evenings I painted the nursery walls, the nights I rested my aching feet on the couch, dreaming about my baby's future. But now, those walls were poisoned. They no longer felt safe. They carried the weight of betrayal. I couldn't stay another night under the same roof with him. Not after the emails, not after the messages. Monica welcomed me into her small apartment, as if she had been preparing for me all along. She hugged me tightly, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to cry without restraint. My tears fell hot and heavy onto her shoulder. "They've taken everything, Monica," I whispered. "My parents, my sister, even Mark. They've all turned against me." She pulled back, her eyes fierce and steady. "Not everything, Claire. You still have yourself, you still have your baby, and you have me. That's more than they'll ever have." Her words lit a fragile flame of strength inside me, but betrayal rarely travels alone. 2 days later, as I tried to steady myself in Monica's kitchen, my phone buzzed with notifications. Against my better judgment, I opened them. It was Emily, her face plastered across a social media post. Claire abandoned her husband. She left him with nothing, and she's unfit to manage that apartment. She's unstable, selfish, and doesn't deserve the life she pretends to have. My chest tightened with every word. Strangers chimed in with cruel comments. I always thought she was dramatic. Poor Mark, he deserves better. I dropped the phone onto the couch and buried my face in my hands. It felt as if the entire world had swallowed her lies and painted me as the villain in my own story. Monica sat beside me, her voice calm but firm. "Don't answer." That's exactly what she wants, to drag you into a fight online where she can twist everything. "But it's not true," I sobbed. "None of it's true." "Then prove it," Monica said simply. "Not with words, but with evidence." Her certainty steadied me. The very next day, Paula, my colleague, reached out. She slid into the booth across from me at a small diner, her face grave. "Claire, I have something you need to see." When the judge entered, the courtroom rose. I stood slowly, grounding myself with a hand over my stomach. The gavel struck, sharp as thunder. The trial began. Laura opened with precision. She laid the mortgage contract before the court, my name standing boldly on every page. "Every payment, every cent of the down payment," she said, "came from Claire Thompson's income and savings." Gasps stirred in the small audience. Next came the text messages from Emily, casual remarks about repainting the walls when the house was hers. Then the email Paula had discovered, where Emily falsely claimed co-ownership and attached a clumsy forgery of my signature. The judge leaned forward, examining the shaky strokes of the document. His brow furrowed. And then Laura pressed play on my recording. Mark's voice filled the courtroom, steady and damning. "Your parents promised to help us financially if I cooperated. Emily thought we could sell the apartment, split the money." I kept my eyes fixed on the table, unable to look at him. Each word from his mouth cut deeper than the last. When their lawyer rose, his defense felt weak, desperate. "My clients acted in good faith." Emily contributed significantly to this family years ago, paying off debts that saved them all. They believed the house should reflect that sacrifice. The judge's expression tightened. So they forged documents to make that belief reality? Emily's composure cracked. She stammered, I was only trying to secure what should have been mine. Claire has always been irresponsible, Laura cut in, her tone sharp as a blade. Irresponsible? The contract bears only her name. The payments came from her account. The only irresponsibility here is fraud. Silence weighed on the room. My father's jaw clenched, my mother's hands trembled. Emily stared at the floor, and Mark sat pale, lips pressed thin, unable to defend himself. Piece by piece, Laura dismantled their claims. She traced the timeline, emails, texts, documents, until the truth stood undeniable. Finally, the judge leaned forward, his voice firm. The evidence is clear. This property belongs solely to Claire Thompson. The defendants, Emily Thompson and her parents, have no legal claim. Furthermore, the forged email warrants investigation for fraud. As for Mark Thompson, by sharing private financial contracts without consent, he is liable for damages. The gavel struck once more. It was over. Relief swept through me, but it wasn't triumph. It wasn't sweetness. It was heavy, bittersweet, like standing on the ruins of a home once cherished. I glanced across the courtroom. My parents sat stiff, their reputation unraveling in front of neighbors they had always sought to impress. Emily's face was ashen, her hands twitching. And Mark still wouldn't meet my eyes. I thought victory would feel like freedom. Instead, it tasted of ash. What I had won back was not only a home, but proof, a painful proof, that the people meant to love me had tried to take everything away. Laura placed a hand on my shoulder. You stood firm, Claire. You took back what was yours? I nodded, my throat tight with unspoken words. Walking out of that courthouse, the sunlight felt different, not warm, not soft, blinding, unflinching. But perhaps that was what I needed. Because now, truth was my shield. And though it left scars, it had carried me through. 2 months after the trial, I held my daughter in my arms for the very first time. The hospital room was quiet, bathed in golden morning light. She was tiny, her fingers curling tightly around mine with a strength that startled me. I named her Ivy, a name that meant resilience, growth, and the ability to cling to life even in the harshest storms. As I whispered her name, I felt something shift deep inside me. Everything I had lost, my trust in my parents, my bond with Emily, the marriage I once believed in, had left scars. But Ivy was proof that endings can also become beginnings. When we finally left the hospital, I didn't return to that grand apartment filled with betrayal. Instead, Monica helped me move into a smaller place across town. The walls were plain, the space modest, but when we hung new curtains together and set Ivy's crib by the window, it felt warmer than any mansion ever could. Sometimes, late at night, I would rock Ivy to sleep and think of my parents, of Emily, of Mark. There were no calls, no messages, no apologies, only silence. But for the first time, silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like peace. I had spent most of my life chasing their approval, measuring myself against their impossible scales. But holding my daughter, I realized love doesn't come from blood alone. Love comes from the ones who stay, who fight beside you, who refuse to let you stand alone. For me, that was Monica. And now it was Ivy, too. One afternoon, as I sat on the balcony with Monica, sipping tea while Ivy napped, she smiled at me. "You're stronger than you've ever been, Claire. They tried to take everything, but you built something they can never touch." Her words sank deep into me. Strength isn't never falling, it's rising, even when the people you trusted most try to keep you down. And to you listening now, I want to say this. Families are complicated. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers, but from those who share our last name. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been treated as less than worthy in your own home, you are not alone. These family stories remind us that betrayal can break us, but it can also shape us into something unshakable. They remind us that sometimes family must be redefined, not by blood, but by loyalty, kindness, and love freely given. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share your own family stories in the comments. Your words might comfort someone who feels invisible right now. And if you'd like to hear more powerful family stories like this one, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because sometimes telling our stories is how we heal. That night, as I laid Ivy down, watching her tiny chest rise and fall, I whispered a promise. You will never wonder if you are enough. You will know every day that you are loved, and in that quiet, I finally understood. Betrayal may scar us, but love, the kind we choose, the kind we protect, has the power to heal us.